Alright, so I'm going to do a quick recording to explain how the formulas work in the dispatch form. Number of people have asked me, and I promised to do a tutorial to try to explain it because it's all mathematics, so it may get a little technical. Let's see how simple we can keep it. Alright, so as soon as you start using your dispatch form, uh, there are three foundation figures that you need to enter. And the first one is dispatch rate. It's right here at the top of the form. And this is where you would put in the percentage that, if you're a dispatcher, this is this percentage that you charge owner operators for dispatching your trucks. If you're an owner operator, this is the amount that you pay to a dispatcher for operating your trucks. And so let's assume that this figure is 10%. So we'll just go ahead and add that 10. And then in the next field, we have the cost per mile. And as usual, we're going to assume that this is $1.80. And then in the next column, we have the driver's pay. How much money per mile do you pay a driver? Right? So let's assume this is 75 cents per mile. All right. Now, if you pay your driver by percentage, you can change this to percentage. But then, also, if you're entering percentage, for example, if the percentage that you're paying the driver is 25%, you're going to enter 0.25. All right. If it's 30%, you enter 0.30. If it's 50%, you enter 0.50. And that's how you enter your percentages in Excel. Right? Just in case anybody is confused about that. I've had one question so far. All right, so, but we're not doing percentages here. We're going to go to rate per mile, and we're going to 0.75 or 75 cents is the rate per mile. All right, so those three very important figures are in, which means that the rest of the form is now ready to accept the information that you're going to put into it. But let's look a little bit at what is actually being calculated in the form. All right, your dispatch rate is calculating. Sorry, the dispatch rate is being used in each column where the dispatch fee is being calculated right here. All right. So when you enter the mile of the trip that you're about to do, let's say that's 600 miles. And the invoice amount that you've quoted, let's say that's $2,000 to go 600 miles, right? You'll notice that the dispatch fee is automatically populated at 10% of $2,000, right? 10% of $2,000 is $200. That's what's there. If I were to change this to 5%, if I were to change that to 5%, then this would then be no longer $200, it's now $100, because that's 5% of $2,000. Okay, but we're going to leave it at 10%. The cost per mile is basically being used to calculate the cost per mile. Just like the dispatch fee is being calculated, so is the cost per mile, or rather the cost of operations. So you're looking at out of this $2,000, your cost of operating your truck for that trip is coming in at $1,080. All right, assuming that you are running your truck at $1.80 per mile. Therefore, this is the same throughout the entire form. all of the formulas that are calculating the totals at the top of the form are dependent on the actual information throughout the form. Nothing here, except for the average rate per mile, nothing here is being calculated here. These are all um, sums of all of the different figures that are running right through the 52 weeks of the form, right? And we did it that way so that there is continuity. I will always know by looking at a form and running a quick counter calculation whether or not there's an error somewhere in the form. So I didn't want to have any errors in the form. So it's sort of a check and balance kind of situation, because some of these figures could be calculated right here. Didn't want to do that. I wanted everything dependent on everything else, right? And that's why the formulas are locked, because if you disrupt a formula anywhere on the form, it could end up affecting the outcome of everything on the form, right? Um, Everything's interdependent. All right, so that's basically how the dispatch rate is calculated. Now the cost per mile basically is um, the cost of operations is basically the result of the cost per mile times the number of miles run. That's basically what we're looking at here, right? So for each week, if you run a certain number of miles, then the cost of operations is equal to whatever you put here as the cost per mile, right? So if you change this, then this figure will change, right? Let's test it. So let's change this to 1.20 instead of 1.80, and you'll notice that this 1080 will now become $720. Change right away, right? And it didn't change here because of a relationship or a formula here. It changed because it changed everywhere. This total is the total of all of the rows going down for the entire 52 weeks that this form covers. All right. I know things are getting a little technical. It's not even important that you understand these details, but there have been some people who would like to know more about how the form calculates or comes to the figures that it does. So I'm going to try to explain that, right? But understanding all of this does not affect whether or not you'll be able to use the form effectively. Um, and the form will just work for you once you add your figures in regularly every day as you move forward in your business. All right, so I don't want to confuse anybody who doesn't need to be confused. All right, so this is information that you find interesting, then watch this video. If it is not information that you find interesting, the technical side of how everything works, then do not watch this video. It will then only confuse you and make you, it's unnecessary. All right, so stop the video here and get back to work. All right, so let's move on. The number of loads booked is a total. Sorry, the number of loads booked is the total of all of the invoice amounts, or the amount of money that you bid on each load that you carry every week is totaled, and we keep that running total for the week in the week's revenue, which is in this case $2,000, because that's the only thing we've entered here. And the total of the week's revenue you will see here in loads booked, which is $2,000, right? So once it's been booked, it's going to show up here. The only way it will not show up here is if it has been cancelled, right? So let's say that we change the status of this load that we just added, and we change it to cancel. Then you'll notice that the information disappears from load booked. It's subtracted, right? So the load book will always be an accurate representation of the loads that you've actually transported. because it will always subtract loads that are cancelled along the way, right? And the $2,000 has moved from load booked to the cancelled, right? And there's a formula that is basically telling the sheet that once a load is cancelled here, subtract it from here and add it here, right? That simple. All right, so um, the same thing goes for if the load is not cancelled, but rather it has been completed, the entire process is completed, and the load has been paid in full. Then once you select paid in full, then the paid in full section will be updated both in the total, the grand total, right, as well as the weekly total of what has been paid in full. So the $2,000 here in loads booked and the $2,000 in paid in full is the same $2,000, right? But we just simply indicating that it has been paid. Gross revenue is equal to the the um, the total loads booked minus the cost of operations plus the dispatch fee, right? So those are the two costs that are being subtracted from the gross revenue, right? Cost of operations plus the dispatch fee um, is being subtracted from the total loads booked to equal what your gross revenue is, or basically what is left back for you after your expenses are spent, right? So um, once you've paid your dispatch fee for that load and you've paid your cost of operations for that load, let's put it back to 180. Then your gross revenue on a $2,000 load for 600 miles is $720. That means that your company has made $720 in profit, gross profit too, because again, well, no, $720 in profit because you're using your cost per mile calculation that you've already included all the um, extended cost of the company in addition to the cost of the actual road cost of running the load. All right. Um, let's see if there's anything else I need to talk about. The dispatch fee, we've mentioned that. The average rate per mile is not a calculation of all of the weeks because I discovered that you cannot average a sum of averages. So the average rate per mile is being calculated here, right, at in each week. So we know that for this week so far, the average rate per mile is $3.33. And if this was the case going right through the form, then we'll be looking at 52 weeks of averages. Now, in order to keep a running average, I thought that all you had to do was to then average the total averages right through the form. It took me literally 3 days of back and forth and retesting and redoing because the figure kept coming up wrong when I, and when I checked it. Eventually I learned from after a lot of research that you cannot average a sum of averages, right? It's a mathematical conundrum. You just can't do it. If you do it, then you will get the correct answer sometimes and you'll get the wrong answer sometimes, right? So it's unreliable. It's an unreliable way of keeping averages. um, so what I had to do then was to simply average the totals, right? Or work it out from the totals. So the average rate per mile here is only dependent on the total miles run, sorry, and is only dependent on the total miles run and the cost of operations, right? So we worked it out that way. So if you divide the cost of operations by the number of miles run, you'll get the average rate per mile. Am I right? Am I wrong? Oh, and I can't see the formula. I might be wrong about that, but the point I'm making is that it's just calculated up here in the totals and does not run right through the form, right? Because that was bringing back the incorrect result. All right. I think that's about it as far as explaining how the totals are calculated, especially the gross revenue. Um, how we came to the conclusion that this is your gross revenue, right? But it's accurate. It's pretty good to follow. All right. So I'm going to end this here. Anybody else has any questions about this, please reach out to me on Facebook and just ask. I will be happy to do another tutorial explaining it or to just give you an answer or both. I'll do both. I have a lot of things that I'm doing at the same time, so I may not be able to do it right away or as soon as I promise to do it, but I will get to it and it'll get done. All right. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to your questions. Have an amazing one.